This podcast is brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tires, batteries, and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. Whether you listen to this program in Geneva, Switzerland or not, you must be aware of the recent dramatic events emanating from the office of the new incumbent of the White House in Washington, D.C., with the unsettling ripples, no waves, in Geneva, and they continue even as I speak. With this in mind, my visit to the International Trade Center in Geneva is very timely. It describes itself as a multilateral agency which has a joint mandate with the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. We know it really as UNCTAD. And Pamela Coke-Hamilton is the executive director, and I'm sitting with her in her office today to learn more about what the ITC actually does. Hello, Madam Coke-Hamilton. Thanks for welcoming me here today.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to have you.
It's good to see you. May I call you Pam for
Absolutely.
the conversation? Thanks a lot. Look, being on UN territory for the first time in many, many months, and with all that's happening in international affairs these days, I have to ask you, first of all, how recent events going on in Washington, D.C. are affecting you and your team here?
Well, I think the answer would be kind of obvious in the sense that the politics and the level of constant orders and the constant changes have had not an impact, not just on ITC, but on the entire ecosystem within which we operate. And so it's natural for everyone to feel a little unstable. And the disruption in expectations and plans have, of course, affected everybody. Some of our institutions have been affected much more than others. ITC,
For example,
the IOM,
which stands for another acronym
Office,
for the UN.
Sorry, acronyms.
Yes, I know.
The International Office for Migration.
Migration, exactly. Yeah.
They have been, I think, over 40% of their
40% of their budget,
and therefore they have to lay off quite a few people over the next week.
Yeah.
Then there's also UN High Commissioner for Refugees.
Yes.
And there's, of course, UNRWA that they have pulled out of. This is the Relief and Works Agency in Palestine. And so there's several. UNAIDS has also been impacted. So the ripple effect is really, as you said, a wave.
Yeah.
It's more than ripples. It's huge waves that you're trying to breathe. We, however, believe that there's always a process where there's change and there's disruption, but we believe fundamentally that what we're doing is good. And so the idea is that we will continue to work towards our mandates. We will do the very best we can to ensure that we continue this process of, multilateralism, of ensuring the interdependence of states. The fact is we are fully interdependent at this point. And the fact is that globalization has made it such that it is very difficult to successfully pursue isolationism in the way that this is being done. So what we are hoping is that over time things will settle and that we will be able to re-emerge as a fully multilateral process, and that the negotiations will become more predictable, and that, not just institutions, but countries who are part of this and who are impacted by this. When you think about the impact on many of the programs that USAID implemented across the world, it's shattering, that's the reality. So that's our...
Okay. I mean, like so many cliches, there are so many cliches about leadership these days, but I can imagine now is a time for real leadership in the organization. So let's come to home in a different way. Like so many of the organizations in Geneva, their work can appear rather remote from everyday Swiss, especially urban Geneva, urban Lausanne, urban Zurich. What does the International Trade Center, ITC, do that Swiss people can relate to? What's it for, and why is it here?
Why are we here?
No, so I mean,
It's an existential question.
Yeah,
Why
but
are you here?
exactly, and we're stuck right down in the southwest part of the country,
Yes.
but the rest of the country is out
all
there.
the way out
yeah,
there,
exactly, exactly.
Well, let me start here. The ITC is a very interesting construct. We were formed in 1964, so just a little over 60 years ago, as a joint agency of the UN and at the time it was the GATT, but the World Trade Organization.
This preceded the World Trade
Precisely.
Organization, yeah.
And the idea was that they recognized that there was a need, and this was the US and Brazil. So we were kind of formed by
The US and Brazil, really?
US
That's
and
interesting.
Brazil
yeah.
were the countries that thought that it was necessary to incorporate an organization that was going to look at the practical aspects of trade.
This is in the 60s, you said?
1964.
So this is Lyndon B. Johnson then?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Long time.
Well, just after the assassination
Right,
of Kennedy.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so, whereas WTO negotiates the rules and UNCTAD is more on the research and the policy framework, we actually do the practical aspects of trade, which is the technical assistance for countries, helping them to get market intelligence, how to export, building capacity on the ground in real terms, keeping up with the changes in the international trading agenda. So, for example, 40 years ago, there was no such thing as digital trade. Now we've had to shift with that. There was no such thing as green trade or sustainability. We've had to shift with that as well. Gender was not even a consideration. So there are a lot of areas that we've also had to pivot to. But in essence, why it's important for Switzerland, besides the overall fact that I believe that we match the overall ethos of Switzerland, in terms of protecting sustainability, ensuring that we do collective agreements, ensuring that we remain focused. I'll give you an example. We work, for example, on a cocoa farm in Ghana with a cocoa cooperative called Kwapa Cocoa. And they are 10% of the overall production force for cocoa in Ghana. And we have a program there called Sankofa. And it's a phenomenal program because what it has done is that we've introduced dynamic agroforestry there.
Dynamic
agroforestry.
Okay, what does that
Which
mean?
in essence is cocoa takes about 3 years to come to maturity. In those 3 years, they can't just sit around and not have anything. So we have them plant other crops in between the cocoa so that they can continue to survive and to sell and as a result also become more resilient and be able to manage while the cocoa is coming to maturity.
Well, I know Ghana. These are private small holdings or
It's
cooperatives or both?
A cooperative.
Okay,
It's a huge cooperative, about 100,000.
Okay, yeah.
And interestingly, our partners are Halba from here, Fairtrade Max Havelaar from Switzerland, and I'm trying to remember the other one. Co-op is the other one. Anyway, we have been working with quite a few Swiss companies.
That's good.
Who have sourced from these sustainable
that's good.
cooperatives, and they've been incredible partners. And in addition to which, Switzerland has also been very active on the sustainability agenda, the green agenda. And so we're very excited to be part of them supporting the global public goods that we provide. So for example, we have the standards map, which is the largest compendium of all the voluntary sustainability standards in the world. And we have that in one place. Yeah.
And just to go to my next question, because you raised the word, and this is just a genuine question, I'm not in any way being cynical. Isn't the sustainability pendulum now swinging in the opposite direction now, with a new occupant in the White House and the apparent withdrawal of interest and money from UN causes such as yours here at the are you now pushing against the modern current, or not necessarily, with regards to sustainability?
Well, let's put it this way. The way I see it is the issue of sustainability is the same as the issue of race or the issue of gender or the issue of human rights overall. It can't go back. If we go back, we're all dead. That's the fact. So even if there are one or two countries that, for whatever reason, decide that they don't want to be part of this movement, that's their choice, and they're entitled to that decision. But in terms of the need for us as a united world to ensure that our children have a future, I think it's incumbent on us to continue the fight. It's not going to be as easy, yes, because the U.S. is the greatest source of emissions, and that there are all kinds of other issues there in terms of funding that they would have provided. And it's always difficult when the largest economy in the world is not participating. But I think it doesn't negate the fact that this is critical and that we have to do it.
No, I was just thinking of the new mantra, which is drill, baby, drill.
Oh, yes.
I'm not sure how that sits with sustainability, you see. But in a way, you've answered my question, which I'd noted here about Switzerland. Would you regard Switzerland as a good practitioner then in the States, in that race? And that's great. So my guest today is Pamela Coke-Hamilton. She's the Executive Director of the International Trade Center here in Geneva. Now, Pamela, we're both from the same small island of Jamaica, though your links are closer than mine because I grew up abroad in England and have lived here a very long time. But tell me a little bit about how Jamaica, with a population of about 3 million, little more than the French-speaking part of Switzerland, manages, small as it is, in the huge international trade currents where remittances and tourism, if I'm correct, play important parts in the economy. But do bauxite and agriculture still feature in the national balance sheet? And I know you're not here to talk about Jamaica, I realize that, Pam, but what's going on? Does Jamaica in any way exemplify important aspects of international trade and the work of the ITC, please?
Sure. I think Jamaica, in a way, is a microcosm of what is happening and what the implications are when there's wars, when trade wars happen.
Trade wars, yeah, okay.
Because essentially, we're price takers. We're net food importing countries. Still. Yeah. I mean, even though if you plant a pencil in the ground, it'll grow. I know. Exactly. But the truth is, at the end of the day, the Caribbean food import bill is about $6 billion now.
Is it really?
For islands of, yes.
My God.
So we have a problem. I know there's been a commitment by the heads of government to reduce that by 25% by this year. So they do have a plan being led by Guyana.
And this is not just the English-speaking Caribbean. You're talking, of course, the languages of the Caribbean.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's a critical thing to recognize. But Jamaica, as a small island developing state, of course, has several vulnerabilities with respect to climate change, with respect to the change fluctuations in the economy, disruption of supply chains, all of these issues. How Jamaica has been able to manage is, one, they have worked very, very, very hard on stabilizing the economy, and on creating a template which, frankly, IMF is now using as an example.
Really? So IMF is learning from Jamaica.
Can you imagine?
I can't. Back in the 70s when I was there, it was the other way around.
They even recruited our finance minister.
Seriously?
Yes, he's there now as one of the vice presidents.
My gosh, okay.
So, life changes.
Never say never.
Never say never. So, but what we've also been able to do is to work on, so we had a program with the Alligator Head Foundation that looks at Ridge to Reef.
And for those of us who don't know, what is the Alligator Foundation?
The Alligator Head Foundation.
Alligator Head Foundation,
yes.
yeah.
It's a program that exists in Portland, Jamaica, that actually works on Ridge to Reef and helping the communities to work on sustainability.
From Ridge to Reef?
Ridge to Reef.
Okay.
So, and they help the community around to benefit from, the what they call the blue economy, and working together to ensure sustainability and sustainable fishing, sustainable production. And they actually won a SIDS award from the UN 2 years ago.
And for those of us who don't know, what is a SIDS award?
It's the Small Island Developing States Award from the United Nations.
I see, and that's quite important, is it, in that award? Okay.
Yeah. And the thing with Jamaica now, though, is that we've also pivoted very strongly. Jamaica's largest goods export is refined petroleum.
Really? God, I'm really out of touch.
Yes.
Well, you throw your... luckily this is not television, but listeners, she's thrown her head back and laughed at me, because I'm completely out of touch.
Well, yes. I can understand people's shock.
Yeah,
We don't have oil.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But interestingly, Trinidad's refinery doesn't
Yes,
work.
I know they have, yeah.
It doesn't work.
Doesn't work? I see.
Hasn't
God.
worked for a while.
Good
so
God.
Jamaica is now refining
My gosh.
petroleum, sending it back to Trinidad
Good
and other
heavens.
places. The second one is, of course, gas, also gas,
Yeah.
petroleum gas. And then the aluminum oxide and
Yes.
aluminum ore.
Yeah.
So those would be the top. Then on the services side, it's tourism.
Sure.
Huge.
Yeah.
50% of
Yeah.
our foreign exchange earnings.
Is it as much as 50%?
Oh, yeah.
Oh gosh, that is big.
Oh,
yeah.
See, that's why
probably,
so
that's
many
probably
of us.
a little bit too big, isn't it?
Well, to be honest,
But what
with
can you do?
Look at the islands. Antigua and
Yeah.
all the Eastern Caribbean islands were like 80%.
That's right.
So COVID really hit hard.
Yes, of course.
But yeah, so we're 50%, give or take. But in terms of stability, I think that we're on a good track. Disruptions always, of course, will impact the smaller developing countries more than others. But I think that everyone is trying to just hold for the time being until it's clear
Okay.
where things are going.
So without wishing to sound too trite, Jamaica's best in class.
I wouldn't say best in class,
But getting
we're
up there.
good.
Getting up there. Good. And Talawa.
Yes, with Talawa.
For those of you who don't know what that means, just rush to your Google Translate.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay. Tell me, let's come back to what's current now, and tell me what your view is as an expert, because you're sitting here in the hot seat, of the tariff war initiated by the Americans this time. Is it just a big man's bluffing game, or should we be worried, especially the countries and small businesses that you focus on here? What collateral damage can it do to the people and the trade you focus on at ITC, or are there any unseen benefits we may not be aware of?
I think, there's been, of course, a lot of conversation on what the trade war will, and people have been writing, all the pundits come out and everybody has some kind of game plan as to what, the various scenarios will be, and if this happens, that will happen. My first take on the trade war or the tariff war is that the fact that it ends with the word war, in a sense, tells you everything. Whether it's a trade war, a tech war, the concept of war is in and of itself a destructive nomenclature. And so nobody wins in a war. Nobody wins. There will always be damage. There will be collateral damage. There will be direct damage. And the worst, for me, the worst impact or the worst consequence of any kind of war, tariff or otherwise, is the diminution of trust. And what keeps a global marketplace or a global relationship together is that, the trust.
But you can have good wars and bad wars. A war against fascism was a good war, whereas what's going on now in Ukraine.
Yeah, but the war against fascism, remember, wasn't started by the people who fought back. The point I'm making is that, and there were how many million people killed?
Huge numbers.
50 million.
Yeah, huge
lost,
numbers.
in 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
There's damage.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not. Yes, I believe in defending.
Wars change things.
Yes.
Yeah.
I believe in defending what's right. I believe in defending, but the truth is, if you can avoid it,
Absolutely,
you know?
absolutely.
So I think, though, that yes, there will be opportunities as well. So, for example, if you look at 2018, China's trade with the U.S. is, I think, this in 2024, China's trade with the U.S. is, I think it's 24% less than it was in 2018. So it says that what China has done,
24 now it's less.
yes, it's less
Wow.
because of the trade war that happened in 2018.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yes, yes, yeah.
China began to shift
Yeah.
some of its trading relationships and to start to source and to trade with other countries outside of the United States.
But that's
And interestingly, I've been watching the Canadian discussions and developments, and I believe that Canada is going to do the same thing.
That's a big number. That's a big percentage. 25, a fifth, you know.
Yeah, I'll find the
Yeah.
exact number.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact is that Canada is going to do the same thing, which is going to be very devastating for the U.S. because Canada is one of their highest, or I think it's their biggest trading partner.
And a friend.
Yes, and Mexico as well.
And a neighbor, both.
Exactly.
And
So-
Mexico too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so what you find is countries start to begin to hedge.
Of
you know,
course,
and,
yeah.
and therefore begin to look elsewhere for partnership, for security, for predictability. And so right now they have, of course, postponed the tariffs for a month for both Mexico and Canada. The 10% has been put on China. China has retaliated. But I'm just reading where Canada has said that because of the suspension of some of the NIH and other FDA, basically the government.
You have to explain
Sorry,
all the
Sorry,
spaghetti
yes.
soup.
NIH
What does that stand for?
is the National Institutes of Health,
Okay, yeah.
and FDA is the Food and Drug
Administration,
that
yeah. I know that one, yeah.
They're now concerned that the goods that are going to be sent, the food especially, from the United States will not be properly vetted.
Yes.
And therefore...
There are risks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so things are mounting, and I think that is going to be a challenge. But there are opportunities also for developing countries to begin to rise to the level of being trade partners for these countries, to begin to look at how they could shift, like Colombia, for example. They can shift to Italy and to Germany. The unexploited, I think, export market for Italy is about 743 million, and then for Germany it's, I think, 100 and something million. So there are opportunities to shift if they have to. And so many countries may begin to do that because they need predictability, they need a relationship that's stable, and they may want to say, okay, well, here's what we're going to start to do. It may not happen now, but over the long term, this is going to be our shift.
So he might have cut off his nose to spite his face,
Well,
as my dear Jamaican mother used to
yes,
say.
exactly. I mean, presumably they have their own agenda as to what this will mean, but I think in the final analysis, it's going to be difficult for countries to rely on the relationship.
So the clock ticks away. Let's come down to the essence of what you do, which is to help small companies, small countries. And let's talk about that at the end. How will small countries fare? Or in fact, how do small countries fare in today's world, where the rules, sadly, seem to be kicked over by those we hope would behave better in this so-called rules-based order? How do you see the next 2 or 3 years? Don't let's go 5, 10, 15. Nobody can tell that. But let's just say the next 2 or 3 years. What's the worst that can happen, Pam? And what's the best that you hope for? Please.
The first thing I would say about, big or more powerful countries kicking over the rules-based order is that it's not new.
No,
You know,
yeah. I didn't mean it to sound like
but what I mean
naive
is
question. Yeah.
we're not shocked by it. I think countries are aware that this can happen, that it does happen, and when there's significant changes, whether in government or in policy, smaller or developing countries or small business have to adjust. So, for example, with the announcement of the EU deforestation regulation, which came into, it has been postponed to come into effect at the end of this year instead of the end of last year. Countries and small businesses have to now put in place the mechanisms to do the due diligence and provide the kind of information that importers in the EU will need to provide to basically establish that they have not contributed to deforestation. That's a tall order, but we're working to establish a deforestation free trade gateway that collects all the information and provides a portal where everybody can get and see that information.
So that comes through here?
Yes,
okay.
In practical terms.
Yeah.
We're also working, of course, on various aspects of value addition. So, for example, in Africa, looking at the African Free Trade, Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, one of the things that we're looking at is what are the potential value chains that will be most powerful in enhancing regional integration within Africa. Right now, regional trade in Africa is under 18%.
Still a very low number.
Very low.
It's like east-west traffic in Africa.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's appalling.
Everybody goes,
north-south.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so what we're working on with the AFCFTA Secretariat and the African Union Commission is identifying those clear, potentially high return value chains and then building them in. So, for example, looking at the automotives, looking at pharmaceuticals, looking at baby food, and of course, looking at textiles and clothing. If we look also at the issue of value addition for the commodities, biggest challenge in Africa has been the continued export of raw commodities. So one of the things that we've been working on, and for the first time you will see that there will be a cobalt refinery in Zambia, funded by the African Financial Corporation, that will produce refined cobalt, which is one of the key elements
the secondary process
for the lithium-ion batteries, for the and so all of this now feeds into the electric car value chain, and that is where we think there's a huge opportunity to move.
So that's encouraging.
Exactly.
Very
Diversification, another area where they're pushing to see how can they move to other aspects of of production, of services, all the other things that could happen, And then, of course, the final thing is the regional integration, pulling together as a regional bloc that gives them much more power than if they go alone.
Oh, that's a very encouraging point to end the conversation. But as they say, this story will run and run. I think it's good.
Yes,
it's good news. Pam, thanks very much for that lucid explanation of what I think is a very complicated area. My guest today has been Pamela Coke-Hamilton. She's the Executive Director of the International Trade Center, which is part of the United Nations here in Geneva. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Mackay Interview podcast, brought to you by Kyoto Japan Automotive Group, a company which I've known personally for over 20 years, and your one-stop shop for tires, batteries and auto parts. Visit their website at www.kyotojap.com for more details. And you can find more podcasts on Anchor FM. Just Google Mackay Interview Anchor FM. Thanks again for listening.